Hi, everyone, and welcome to Deep Learning with PolyAI. My name is Michelle, and I'm here with Nikola, and today we're talking about voice, AI, customer experience in retail. So, retail is an industry that's no stranger to really using their brand as a strategic differentiator, which is why the stakes are so high in getting voice right and getting the customer experience right. But they are also uniquely challenged in a lot of different ways in being able to deliver this great experience through voice. So I wanted to just talk about it. Like, let's talk about some of these challenges, starting with one that we are currently living. So I doubt any retailers will really have the time to be watching a podcast on their industry as we enter into the holiday frenzy. But seasonality is a huge issue for retailers and their ability to sort of deliver a great customer experience, particularly on voice. Um, and before we talk about it, I did want to kind of just show from our own customers, mouth, like their challenges and sort of what they're doing in order to kind of answer this problem. Here's one major brand, Carter's, one that my mom shops at. Like she should be a shareholder at this point with how much money she spends at Carter's on my children. But yeah, Mike mentioned during our customer event that he was able to reduce hiring by over 100 people, which helped him sort of deliver more brand consistency. But 100 people. And this is, when I'm imagining what context he's saying this in, it sounds like to support seasonality. Like, Nicola, like, why is this a challenge?
Yeah. So I mean, like in retail, it's one of most seasonal kind of like industries where people do a lot of shopping over the holidays, right? So kind of like from Black Friday onwards, it's nearly impossible to get to speak to a stakeholder in retail, right? They are busy as hell. Their volumes jump by a factor of a few times. And this is typically a period that they prepare for the whole year, right? They prepare for it from a technical perspective and more importantly, from a staffing perspective, where, they'll go and have to hire those people to support them at that time. And the volume is so different that they'll actually like, it's like the whole kind of like hiring spree and they're all doing it. So it gets really difficult because they're competing for the same pool of labor as other retailers. And, you know, these peaks and troughs are difficult, especially because when you kind of like need that surge demand, it tends to cost more. And from COVID onwards, and as we've seen these labor shortages get worse and worse, we're basically now in a spot where um, SLAs did more and more
Hmm.
for retailers, and they can't have them there because these are returns. These are, people who might not shop with them again if they
Yep.
have well, a present tag or picture holiday. But if you're waiting for a Christmas present and it doesn't get there in time and you can't reach them, yeah, you probably won't be shopping with that same brand
Exactly.
next year, right? So it's hugely impactful, um, and it's an industry where like this means a lot, and it's not unique in that, but we see our volumes of retail clients more than double something for this period. And,
Wow.
if you're not ready for that peak, if you keep staffing at the same level, or you're just unable to find those people, your SLAs will dip. If you're meeting them 90% of the time, you could see them drop to 10%, and people in trouble.
Yeah. It's interesting. Mike mentioned in his comment that the thing that it helped with SLA is obviously top of mind, but was this idea that it was helping to provide consistency. And I think something you said um, rings very, very true for retail in particular. Loyalty is incredibly fragile in retail. The customer loyalty can disappear in a matter of seconds if they just have one single bad experience. There was this Forrester quote that said, after one negative experience with the brand, the consumer is, I think it was something like 25% or something around there, less likely to shop with that brand in the future. That is an incredibly meaningful statistic. And, this idea that he's saying, we were able to reduce hiring by 100 people, and that helped us improve consistency
Yeah.
seems kind of at odds with one
No,
another.
absolutely, right, and if you think about just the nature of retail and, like, the different brands, um, I mean, you said your mom is shopping, not necessarily you, right?
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's like, I'm sure you spend a lot of money on your kids as well. So it's like, you look at, like, brands some of the more digital brands that, younger people have flocked to, Amazon does not have voice support, which
Yeah.
is why
Oh, yeah.
it's got a demographic shift between its, populations that is different from, say, a more traditional retailer. So for that more traditional retailer, it becomes even more important to keep that as a competitive edge because it is one, right?
Yep.
And it's messy and it's hard work. And Amazon went for scale and built a really good system where, they're far more likely to just reimburse you or accept something and give you credits than regular retailer is because they have that scale and ability and they've built a process for that. But if you're a more traditional retailer, you really need to do this well. And
Yep.
if you don't have the stuff, or if you're bringing in untrained stuff, that's the other thing, right? Like you've scrambled, you failed to hire where you were going to hire a month before, you're calling another BPO and you're like, hey, I need 50 agents, I need 100, how much can you give me? They're rubbing their hands, they're quoting you at higher price, like, you're in between like being off budget, you're asking for more money. And then you get a bunch of these agents and they don't know your processes. They don't know anything. They're just, been told that they're on the account like a week before it started. So the quality of service dips again, and it's inconsistent
Yep.
because they're learning on the job that not worked for you through like a respectable ramp period. So it just becomes a calamity. And, I think when you look at, you're right. I mean, no one will watch this right now in retail because we were with a big client yesterday and an EA of a very senior stakeholder told me, hey, this must be important given that we don't take meetings in this period.
Sure.
Okay. Like, cool. And that's just, fact of life in retail. And that's what we like doing it because it's not that they don't want to they want to remove 110 people. It's really not about that. It's that they've always lived with this problem of surge demand that they've had to solve it in clumsy ways.
Yeah.
And it's modulated with technology. Like you're able to, the call distribution times are different as well during this period, right? And if you can do it well, then you're really kind of like have a more consistent workforce and an experience for everyone.
Yeah. It's something else you mentioned, and actually I think plays into the consistency, issue as well, is this idea that, there's a difference between me and my mom. A very, very big difference in how we shop. Um,
23 chromosomes.
Yeah. But also like several decades. So, this idea that she might shop differently than I, and also, English is a second language for her, whereas it's a first language for me. And I think this issue of kind of having to just ramp up to 100+ people on the floor and then train them, to your point, also changes depending on the diversity of your customer base, the languages they speak,
Yeah.
where they want to, interact with you, where they prefer to interact with you. And I think this is another major challenge um, that's, maybe partially solved by automation, but it's just another interesting thing. Somebody wants to call in and speak to somebody in their native language. Um, it's another challenge that I think retailers have to think about. And then, are you investing in somebody who speaks, you know, uh, whatever language is that the person wants to talk
Yeah.
to?
Yeah, this is a big challenge in Europe, especially, right? In the US, you're really dealing with two languages at scale. Um, and then, like in Europe, I've been to consumer goods contact centers with support for 20 languages, right? And just like the kind of like, they're looking for polyglots, people who can, maybe speak all the Scandinavian languages. Then you're
Yeah.
looking for someone who hopefully cover like Southeast Europe across like those 5, 6 small markets. It's it's really difficult. They kind of like playing whack-a-mole. Like, oh, where's my Hungarian speaker?
Yeah.
I don't have a Hungarian speaker. Okay, like, you got to find a Hungarian speaker. Maybe there aren't that many calls, but you need to have that support. So it gets really difficult, and they'll typically have multiple locations around Europe to deal with this. And
No, and
that's
then with seasonality too, it's like you're gonna
it's the
scale
thing.
something
Like,
up to
yeah,
switch it.
it's a double explosion of the
Yeah.
complexity of the problem. So it gets really difficult for them to address it, and then what happens? Service levels suffer, and in the end, kind of like bloodshot eyes, you record that message saying, "Did you know you can do this online?" And it will go on repeat, and you're at the 10%. People are waiting for half an hour and just listening to Nikola repeating, "Did you know you can most things? Did you know you can do most things online?"
Yep.
That's kind of like where your conviction around never shopping with that brand
Exactly.
reaches
You know,
levels.
to that exact point. So I worked in the retail industry for a long time, and I used to know all of these e-commerce stats like off the back of my hand. And I don't remember this one, but I know it's one, which is just about the load times on your e-commerce page, like how fast the pictures load, the product images, the text, all of that as you scroll through. So let's say you're shopping on a clothing site. Even a millisecond of latency, actually translates into revenue lost.
Huh.
And then you apply that same logic, and, like, obviously, the world's changed. You have content delivery networks, you have things making this faster. It's still a problem, and it's still something that e-commerce managers track. Imagine applying that same logic to the voice channel. I need to now listen to you condescendingly telling me that I can go on the website, I can chat for an answer. You're wasting the time between me and your brand, and to me connecting and interacting with your brand when I'm expecting instant gratification. Imagine the cost, like the brand damage that that's doing. This is yet another challenge.
No, no, I mean, it's huge. Like you should not be late. You've spent money on something, you're waiting for it, and you're there. I mean, airlines are famous for this, right? Outside of retail, and I think people have probably been most like hurt by their waiting times and hold music's kind of like dream of the BA one in my but yeah, it's PTSD. But no, I mean it's a big problem, and they should have it. They should have a voice assistant. They should have chatbots. They should have everything, right?
Yeah. What I always wondered, right, is what the exchange is, and how retail currently sees this. Because again, like retail, this is an industry that has been way ahead of other industries in terms of investing in the customer experience, in terms of investing in a unified understanding of their customer and being able to kind of meet them where they are, be omnichannel. This was really a pioneering industry for thinking about their consumer and figuring out how they can use technology to meet them. Um, but I always wondered how a brand obsessed business thinks about, AI, thinks about voice assistants, thinks about automation. Is it a trade off? Do they think about this as being a little bit of a brand cost, um, in terms of this slightly lessened, personal experience of having a human kind of on the phone versus not? And I want to bring up another quote from another one of our customers, because it feels like the way that a lot of retailers are thinking about this problem is that, you know, whether it's a brand cost or not, it's worth it because you can allow, your people, your humans on the team to do more complicated work, to have more of those conversations that are even more meaningful, for consumers, to have with that brand. So yeah, she's saying basically if AI can handle these high volume and low complexity calls, it's releasing the team to being able to focus on more complicated questions and probably answer those questions better because they have more time because they're not looking at a flashing red light telling them that the queue is like 10 plus people deep. Um, yeah, so I just think it's
So it also comes back to incentives, right? Because you're right, they've invested a lot, and there's a lot that can be done digitally, and like people kind of like think of like maybe voice and digital at being at odds with each other. They're not,
yeah,
right? Because your agent might not know that they can like send a link, or maybe they're not very good at like, phone number link. You should have gotten a link. Click this. It's your shipment. Let's look at it. Like we're there immediately, right? We're kind of like collaborating. You're looking at your screen. We're changing something. They might not know that, so they're asking you, doing it for you. It gets really, really messy. They spend a long time on that call,
yep,
where like a voice assistant program to do explicitly what's like the easier, simpler thing that people have often toiled and worked and spent money on technology to do. Um, when we do that, like they end up like spending much less time on the call. But more importantly, like a human might have spent much longer on the call for a worse experience. And sometimes, especially if you have outsourced labor, so it's not your own agents where you don't control the process, you're kind of like paying for usage. So, for a BPO, they're not necessarily as incentivized to have like a lower average handling time. Um, they're just interested in selling you as
all,
much labor as possible, right?
yeah,
And that agent ramping and taking longer. Often, and this is not a retail specific, right? On average, a voice assistant, the same thing as a human, will spend 20% less time
Yep.
doing it because people are slightly less verbose. There's a bit less chit chat. It pulls up a piece of information more quickly. But what we've sometimes been shocked with, especially when we compare average handling times to companies that have a mix of in-house and offshore agents, is those average handling times are way longer, like sometimes unbelievably long, right? We're talking like 7, 8 minutes for something that should take no more than a minute, right?
Totally.
And, you've been on those calls where you just can tell that whoever's dealing with it is like, okay, set a piece of information. And you hear like the exasperation of someone who's looking for the right screen. Like, let me put you on hold. They want to ask a tier two agent how to do something they don't know, right?
Yep.
So the discrepancy in average handling time can be like 5x sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's back to the incentives, right? Because if you see that happening, it's probably offshore, it's probably an on-ramped agent. They're doing their best, right? It's not nefarious in that they've been told spend 5 times longer on the
Yep.
call, but they just can't do it well, right? Um,
Yeah.
and the Brave voice assistant really, again, like brings much more consistency into the whole experience and it pays to use.
Yep. I think you said this several podcasts ago, but that voice is the most intuitive interface, and I still come back to that all the time, especially when I think about, um, for example, like when you're in a store and you're shopping, and you have a salesperson that's sort of helping you. You're asking them a million questions, like, "Where is this cotton from? What percentage of it is cotton? Like,
Interesting
where
question.
is it
I've
made?"
never asked that question.
Okay, well, neither have I actually. But let's just pretend that you're the type of person to do that. The more time they
What's
take,
good for an Egyptian cult?
great, check. What's the thread count? I don't know. People do ask these
No,
types
that
of
was the
questions.
thing. Okay.
But yeah, the people do ask these types of questions, and in person, somebody really taking their time with you and like connecting with you, more time is seen as just a higher degree of patience and this higher degree of like great kind of brand interaction. But given what you said about voice being an intuitive interface, if you think of it as an interface, if you think of it as being like the same way I'm trying to shop online, the more time you introduce into the sort of equation, the more friction it feels like I'm having. I'm just trying to get a problem solved, right? I'm not trying to have a, you know, great brand interaction about cotton. I'm trying to like get my answer that or get my problem solved, right? Um, but I guess one thing that I'm curious about, and I wonder if retailers who are brand obsessed are too, is just when this reaches mass adoption, when AI automation reaches mass adoption, the way email has, for example, um, is voice from a human going to feel like a handwritten note? Is it going to feel like it's just kind of interrupted the norm, and like voice becomes this higher degree of brand expression, where it's like, oh, this is a real person, um, and like that feels special. I wonder about that. What do you
Oh,
think?
well, I think there are a few threads to unpack there. I think like, yeah, I mean, a handwritten note is great, has the right information. And
Yeah.
if, you know, for the right experience, I think to this date, the best contact center I ever visited was in London in Canary Wharf. I forget the name, but they have a number of kind of like aspiring actors that work there. Uh, they mostly sell wine to the US. They all have sommelier degrees of different levels. I don't know much about it, but they were really these are actors, so their diction,
Yeah.
charisma, like they're good sellers, right? I think most actors, if they wanted to, could probably be very good salespeople, right? And when you just look at that context center, I think it's an experience to be hard to replicate with technology. But it's a good example because if you think about like sommeliers and like they had to learn a lot, right? It's not just that they're good with people,
Yeah.
empathy, etc. They had to learn, and that's actually knowledge that's very easily automatable these days with like generative AI, where I think based of a few textbooks and conversations about wine, he's probably going to do more than I. It will create a voice assistant. It'll be far better at consulting and advising about wine than I ever will. Right. So
Yeah.
if you like, you know, Primitivo, then a Montenegrin Vanads might be a good idea for you, or Zinfandel from Dalmatia might do well as well. This is literally the only like bread sub type of wine that I know anything. Uh, but it's it's hard, to get that level of knowledge. So I think, yeah, if you're buying high-end goods, you love high touch.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's reason that they pop open a bottle of champagne in Cartier when you buy something expensive or something like that. Because it's just like a premium experience. You're buying not just the product, but the experience as well. I've always found that interesting between the US and Europe. Right? Like the number of times that I've been cajoled into spending far more money in America relative to Europe is exactly that like high touch sales experience.
Yeah.
Europe is just inherently can't seem to we can't get it into our heads. And Americans, like they're born with this, right? There's something in the air. Um, so I think on the phone, it's not very different, right? And
Yeah.
with AI, we finally have, as of this year, we have the capability to have like a consult really rich experience. And, in retail and in other verticals, attitudes are shifting. There are people we've spoken to that told us they would never implement a voice assistant. Some of them have come back and their clients now. Others just kind of like tick box. I can't be bothered with that peak. I just want you to like do what you can. And that's simple, but it's also less exciting because to us, really, it's been like places like hospitality, retail, where we've had the biggest successes and most meaningful deployment because these are people whose revenue hinges on that experience.
Yep.
If you're like improving their SLAs, if you're reducing their wait times, if the experience is more consistent, the story very quickly stops being, oh, I have a slightly more efficient operation. It becomes power projection
Yep.
because Carter's has that experience and second back that would be comparable. Well, they have um, they have a meaningful competitive advantage, and same holds for most industries, really.
Yeah. Agree. So we talked a little bit about the fact that this rich experience, like this sort of high touch, consultative, flexible, like human kind of experience is finally available now. Um, But what do you think it's going to be like? What do you think the opportunities are for the future of kind of AI and voice for retail? Like, what do we think is going to be around in 2 years? For example, we've got this trend now of hyper personalization.
Yeah.
How do you see voice playing into that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about, especially, let's go back to our one of our favorite clients here, right? Like, we don't have something like this yet, but it's
Yeah.
something that we could do.
Yeah.
Which is, let's say that I bought something for my daughter, right, who is 9 months old, and then I call back and it's like, hey, I need a different size. Cross reference the date from our last interaction when I might have mentioned how old she is, or we actually have like, you know, clothing size. She's in the 99th percentile, but she's a Serbian baby. So maybe, we just pull it forward by like two sizes, wherever it was. And then
Yeah.
like, I remember that in conversation.
Yeah.
Just think of like a brand where they go like, whoa, you know something. I like, it's
Yeah.
the highest touch experience possible. It's like you're speaking to a friend who knows how old your child is, and they're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
different size," or no, just simple things like, it's Bill's clothes, it's, whatever. Um, I think it's like infinite. The other thing is just like knowing who's calling. Was
Sure.
able to use myself as a very simple example. I think about 50% of my winter wardrobe is jumpers from John Lewis. I've been buying the same type for I think the last 6 years because I'm a very primitive man and I don't have sophisticated fashion sense. So when I'm not wearing a poly Patagonia, I'm wearing like a jumper from John Lewis. And like, that's a very easy sell for me. If I could call and just be like, hey, I need two more. I'll do like a gray and a red this time.
Yep.
You know who I am. You know where I live.
Exactly.
Whoa, do you still live at this postcode? Yeah, I do that. That's cool. Okay, thanks. Bye. Here's 200 pounds. Right?
Totally. Well,
Like, I'd love that. It would be like,
yeah, exactly. It's interesting, the example that you gave of personalization, that first one with your daughter is a predictive example. Like what's personalized to you is the anticipation of what you're trying to buy. And then that second one is kind of the more traditional, like, hey, I know who you are. I know what your preferences are. And I'm going to ask you about them. Going to see if I can just get you
I mean,
your
you know
goal.
more about this than I do, right? But like, if we come back to like what data conversational AI can provide to a marketing stack,
Yep.
then like, in 6 months, I'm due for a different set of ads.
Yep.
And I don't know how but you know who I am, and when I'm on the phone,
Totally.
like, it's time to show me 3-year-old, mini Range Rover toys or whatever, right?
Yeah. The thing that I find most exciting about conversational AI and retail and this sort of like future of customer experience data is that the voice channel was really never part of this, unified CX story. It really wasn't. You might have, an agent that's sort of seeing a pop-up that's saying, "Hey, this person actually put up in a ticket about that John Lewis sweater, and they don't like this one anymore." Just so that you know, this person might be calling about that. Um, but it's really like up to the agent to read that, to interpret it, to make sense of it, and to turn it into
Report on it. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. But I think it's about to get a lot more interesting with the introduction of conversational AI and automated conversations that you can mine the same way you'd mine any other channel, stitch it
And
together
I
and
mean, absolutely. And just, if you think about like issues operationally, about returns and stuff, it's like, hey, it turns out that a lot of people who ordered size 9
yep,
here struggle.
yeah,
So maybe the size 9 is slightly different from
yeah,
others. And maybe we add a note on the website for that product.
sure.
And like,
Maybe
hey,
you change suppliers because that size 9, there's something defective. I mean, that's
or
the
or you're
beauty.
just off and you should just like rename those sizes. I don't know, right? But like you figure that out and you take out like 10% of your shoe returns.
Yeah.
That's like really powerful. That's like, an operational improvement and satisfaction boost.
I completely agree. I think, and then to tie it into not just like what's predictive about the problem that you're calling in about or the product that you're calling in about, but these ideas that you can give a personal incentive to someone based off of not just their history, but what you think they're calling about, what you think their problem is, and what you know tends to happen next. So there's this concept in retail data, um, like this predictive concept of the next best action, and it was like made famous by this one company that probably everybody knows. But the idea that somebody calls in about something, what are they most likely to do next? If you understand that somebody who calls in about a size 9 thing is most likely to return and then churn and not come back to your brand, what can you do right in that moment while you have them on the phone to make sure that that doesn't happen, to make sure that you've turned this negative opportunity or so that this negative experience into an opportunity? And I think that's the beauty of the future of this space and why voice AI is so important. Like you start that transformation now, so you're ready to be competitive when this really starts to be the future. It's just another way to sort of leverage your brand as a competitive asset.
And I mean, like, it's the other thing is just also like, you think of like the volume of calls that someone with like a few hundred agents gets, right? And they're busy. They don't really have time to ask, be consultative sometimes, or they don't know how, or they don't have a place where they store that information. But like, if you're tracking sentiment throughout the interaction, it's like they're angry about this or they're unsatisfied about, like, hey, this new red that you've introduced is different from the previous one. And like, I didn't know,
Yeah,
whatever, right? Uh, or like the model changed slightly and the shoe, I don't know, is less comfortable for me than it used to be. Like that's all like stuff that you have in there. And like, listening to you talk about the website and how like, we're tracking where they're spending attention and stuff. In a way, that's like really difficult. It's like parsing very implicit signals when you could just ask, hey, like, is it, you know, is it like
true,
color? Is it the shape?
true.
Is is it like, you could get that information back and you could request this information back from your contact center.
Ooh, love
People
that. You have
people really
almost
use the contact center as a data collection thing.
that's the
Is that
dream.
yeah,
Include it into the flywheel. Love that. Well, we are at time, and so I think to all retailers, like, good luck in this season. It looks like it's gearing up to be a gigantic one based off of Black Friday numbers. But yeah, it's been great speaking with you, Nicola. Looking forward to our
always
next